Hello, it is Matthew with Dead to Rights. I am debating with myself right now about what I want to talk about. I have a lot of things that are on my mind, a lot of things on my mind at all times, but particularly right now, I have a couple kind of competing ideas. I think I'm going to stick with the one that is kind of on my mind the most prevalently right now, and that is this difficult situation in the first letter to the Corinthians when Paul is encouraging the disciples who are there, or the followers of Jesus who are there, to not marry, to not even be focused on marriage, but rather to maintain singleness and solidarity toward the Lord for the betterment of their focus. That their focus would not be pulled between the Lord and worldly kind of desires. And this is a very difficult thing for me to grasp because it's not something that is simply understood. You have to understand what's going on in Corinth, and you have to understand Paul's argumentation when he's encouraging the believers there to refrain from worldly ties like marriage. It's clear that this is not a command from Paul. One, he says as much. He says that this is not a command, but rather it's his assumption or it's his estimation of what will be best for the church. And we know it's also not a command because it doesn't fit alongside Paul's other teachings, right? In another letter, Paul discusses some teachers that he criticizes because they forbid things like marriage. They forbid things that are good, and Paul even calls it. He says it's a good thing from God. And so, what does Paul mean? Why is Paul now telling the Corinthian church if he's now said, "Listen, people should not forbid marriage, but rather they should celebrate marriage as a good gift from God," and yet he's encouraging the Corinthian church. I would encourage you not to get married and to remain single like I am, for a single person can focus solely on God, but a married person, his focus is divided, his interest is divided. Why is Paul saying these things? Well, I think it really comes down to this statement that Paul makes in this whole argument. He says, in light of this present distress, right? This is the crux of all of Paul's argument in this instance when he's talking about marriage and he's talking about people. He says to remain as you are. It's this whole idea of remaining as you are. If you're a slave, don't seek freedom. If you're free, don't seek slavery. Who would? If you're married, don't seek to be unmarried. If you're not married, don't seek to be married, but remain as you are. And the whole crux of this argument is in this phrase that he says, in light of this present distress. Now, you have to understand, what is the present distress then? What is Paul so distressed about that would cause him to encourage the church that even if you're a slave, don't think about freedom. Now, Paul does caveat this. He does say, listen, if you have an opportunity to gain freedom, then by all means take it, because the Lord loves freedom. For freedom, Christ says free in Galatians, I believe. So certainly, Paul's not advocating that you would just simply be a slave and be satisfied with that, but he's saying there is something so severe going on. There's something so pressing in the life of the church that I would encourage you not to seek anything else in life, but to simply just focus on the Lord. And this is a key that we understand through his discussion about marriage, is that he's interested in someone's focus. That if you get married because of this present distress, if you get married, your interest and your focus will be divided. Naturally, you have to think about not only how to please the Lord, but also how to please your wife, how to please your children, how to raise your family. If you're single, you don't have to think about those things. I can live however I want so long as I'm pleasing the Lord with all that I do. And so, what is this present distress that Paul is talking about, and is it relevant today? Well, I think the present distress is two things. And I think both of them are found in in this letter to the Corinthians. I think one is explicitly found, and one is is still explicitly found, but it's not necessarily directly tied to this text. It's more the whole theme of the letter to the Corinthian church. The first is that Jesus is coming back. This is the first piece to the present distress, right? Jesus is going to return. Now, that in and of itself is true for every church, so that can't be simply the matter. But Paul does say explicitly in his argumentation that the day of the Lord is coming soon, and so he's encouraging people to live these certain ways, to refrain from marriage if they're able to refrain from thinking about bettering their lives or different circumstances of life, that they should be focused solely on the Lord, how to please him. And the first part of this whole problem that Paul sees is the Lord is coming back sometime. And so this is an important part of Paul's argumentation. Because Jesus is coming back, you have something to attend to. Don't get distracted in this moment, in this present distress. Paul's distressed, not that the Lord is coming back, but there's something about the Lord's return that is distressing Paul as it pertains to the church in Corinth. And he says so much in this whole part of Scripture when he's talking to them. But the other part, which is found in the whole of the letter to the Corinthians, is this. It's not simply that Jesus is coming back, but it's the state of the Corinthian church in light of the imminent return of Jesus Christ, or the perceived imminent return. Now, obviously, we're looking at it 2,000 years in history, almost. And we might say, well, Paul was wrong. Jesus didn't come back. But he's not wrong. At the very least, they would meet their Lord in death. And life is a vapor, we're taught all through Scripture. So even if Jesus didn't come back in their lifetime, they still all died. To my knowledge, not a single Corinthian church member that was alive in Paul's day is alive today. And so, the second key to this present distress that Paul is talking about, why he was so concerned, is in thinking about the Lord's imminent return, or you're going to meet him in death, the church was in such a circumstance that it was concerning to Paul. The sins and the pride and the selfishness of the believers in the church were so severe, were so prevalent in the life and the outworking of the church, that Paul said you should not focus on anything else in life, but you had better get this stuff nailed down. You had better figure this out. Because Jesus, the day of the Lord, where he is going to judge all people for what they do in their body, is coming soon. And what Paul was looking at was all kinds of horrific sins that were not fitting for the believer. And so this is the present distress that Paul is concerned with. The church was not living up to the standard and the model of Christ, the same standard that Paul taught them and lived out for them. And they were not thinking about the return of Jesus. They were not thinking about the fact that they would die and be judged. But they were going on in sinful pleasure, assuming that life is just going to go on. I can do whatever I want. All things are lawful for me. But Paul was concerned about this. This is why Paul said, don't seek something different in life. If you're a slave, don't think about freedom. If you're free, don't think about slavery. If you're married, don't think about, well, what if my wife dies? Or if I'm not married, don't think about marriage, because you have better, more important, more pressing things to attend to, because the church is not fit right now. It's not fit for the kingdom of Jesus. And he was concerned that if Jesus comes back, and he thought that he would very soon, and like I said, at the very least, they were going to die. What would Jesus say about them if they had not figured this out? Could Paul be certain about them? in all their pride and arrogance and loving of self and their sexual immorality and their covetousness and their abusing of the poor, taking each other to court, and all these things, Paul was looking at them and saying, I could not commend you to my Lord. So you need to figure this out and stop thinking about all these other things in life, these worldly things that are going to take your eyes off of Jesus. It was distressful to Paul. And so I think that we ought to examine where we are, the churches we're in, the culture we're in. The United States of America calls themselves a Christian nation. I've talked about this many times. But the life of the average American who calls himself a Christian is not too dissimilar from the life of the average Corinthian who called themselves a Christian. And it is time for the American church to stop thinking about the small things in life, whether I'm going to get married, whether I'm going to have the job I want, how long do I have to stay in this job. Now, if the Lord gives you opportunity to do something, or if by not doing it you would be leading yourself into temptation, like for example, if you are uncontrolled in your flesh and you love a girl or you love a boy and you're struggling with sexual immorality, then by all means get married. Paul says get married. It's not a sin. Paul's not condemning it as a sin. He's simply saying that it's better for you to focus on the Lord because there are pressing things in the life of the church that need to be taken care of. And so obviously if you are prone to sin, I love this girl, but we really struggle together. I know about this. I struggle with self-control. I need my wife. I do. But that's not a commendation to me, right? I don't have a lot of self-control. And so I need a controlling factor in my life. And Paul says it's not a sin to have that controlling factor, but it's not as good as being self-controlled, right? It's not as good as someone who's able to say, I don't need a wife. I would love a spouse, but I don't need one. I'm not going to sin if I don't have one. I'm not going to fall into sexual immorality. I'm going to love the Lord. I'm going to serve the Lord with my whole heart and all my life, and I'm not going to think about marriage. That is an amazing thing that I'm I'm not going to say I'm envious of, but I certainly wish that I myself could have been like that as a young man. I was not like that as a young man. I needed to get married. But I can see in my own life, married with a child, that my interests are divided. I consistently have to look at my wife and say, and measure my own ambitions and my own desires by her ambitions and her desires and her willingness to go along with those desires. If I didn't have my wife, I can make any decision I wanted. But because I have my wife, I have to temper myself and I have to love her as Christ loves the church, and I have to lay my life down for her, lay my ambitions down for her. Now, I'm thankful that I have a wife who will go along with my ambitions if she feels like I'm saying, "Hey, the Lord wants us to do this." But that doesn't mean that I just take every opportunity like I could if I were a single man. If I were single, I could just say, "Yeah, let me move to Africa. Let me move to the Middle East. Let me move into the most dangerous jungle of the world to preach the gospel." I could do that, and that would be amazing. It's not less amazing that I'm with my wife. I love my wife. I love my child. I get to raise a little boy to love the Lord. That's an incredible thing. But my interests are divided in this world. So as Americans, we ought to consider, are, are we in a present distress like Corinth was? I think in many ways we are. I think you look at the political, economic situations of America and most American Christians, and you look at a lot of the sinful tendencies that the church in Corinth had. And you'll see a lot of this in the American church, and it's something to be very concerned about. It's something I'm concerned about quite often. And I hope that the American church, that most churches can tackle these issues and not get caught up in the worldly changes of life and our own ambitions. We should be singularly focused as much as we can on Jesus, how to please him, and how to strengthen our churches so that we're no longer drinking milk like the Corinthian church was, but that we're able to eat meat, not only eat meat, but feed it to other people. I'm able to give life to other people and lift other people up. So that's gonna be it. Um, like I said, I was just kind of dealing with a few different topics, but hopefully that makes sense. And I gotta get going. So have a good one. I will talk to you later. Be blessed.